Hello, friends. We are back for another week of distance learning, and today we are starting Unit 8. And Unit 8 is equations and inequalities. We've done several equations and inequalities during bell work, so it should not be brand new to you. But if you haven't done so already, we are going to go over 8.1. Go ahead and get your workbook, and let's get started. We're going to do the even ones together, and I want you to do the odd ones on your own. And part 1 says solve each equation using the substitution method. And the substitution method, all that means is you think about what number you can substitute for your variable. So in number 2, y is our variable. What number plus 6 equals 20? Well, if you think about it, it would be 14. So you would put y equals 14. If we substitute 14, 14 plus 6 equals 20. Number 4, what number minus 15 equals 20? Well, it's got to be bigger than 20, and the number that you subtract 15 from and get 20 is 35. So k has to equal 35. Number 6 is 15 times what equals 60. 15 times what equals 60. And the answer to that is 4. Okay, and the last one, 1/10 g equals 12. So 1/10 of what number is 12? This definitely is our most tricky one, and if you think about it, it's another way of saying what number do you divide by 10 to get 12? So 1/10 of 120 equals 12. And if you couldn't do that mentally, I will show you in a moment how to solve this by balancing. All right, so that is part 1, solving using the substitution method. So over here, you would just think, what number can I put in here that will give me the correct answer? All right, the second part says solve each equation using the concept of balancing. And balancing pretty much is what I was doing in bell work to teach how to solve these. And balancing, your goal is to get the variable by itself. So look at 10. B is our variable. We want B by itself. So how do we get rid of B? How do we get B by itself? We have to deal with this plus 18. And how you deal with the plus 18 is you do the opposite. So what is the opposite of plus 18? Well, it is minus 18. But the concept of balancing, if I subtract 18 on the left side of the equal sign, I have to do the same thing to the right. You have to be fair or it doesn't work. So plus 18 minus 18, that cancels out. So B is by itself. And if you do 34 minus 18, you will get 16. So B equals 16. Let's look at 12. H minus 15 equals 9. H is my variable. I have to deal with this minus 15. So how do I deal with a minus 15? I do the opposite. And the opposite of minus 15 is plus 15. Again, to keep things fair, if I add 15 on the left, I have to add 15 on the right. Minus 15 plus 15, that's called a zero pair. They zero out, leaving H by itself. So H equals 9 plus 15. 9 plus 15 is 24. All right, 14, there's a very powerful thing you can do when you have something that looks like this. This is M divided by 6. Well, what is the opposite of dividing by 6? It is multiplying by 6. So this is in fraction form. So I'm going to write 6 in fraction form. But if I multiply the left by 6, I have to multiply the right by 6. Okay? And these 6's cancel out. And you'll end up with 1 times M is M over 1 times 1 is 1. And 16 times 6 is 96. And so we would just write M over 1 is the same thing as M. M equals 96. So when you have a variable over a number, that's a division problem. And the opposite of dividing is multiplying. All right, let's go to the next page. And let's look at 16. This section says solve each equation using the concept of balancing. Write all fractional answers in simplest form. All right, so we've got y minus 2/5 equals 3/5. I need y by itself. I need y by itself. I've got a minus 2/5 that I have to deal with. What is the opposite of subtracting 2/5? Well, it's adding 2/5. Okay, but if you do that on the left, you have to add 2/5 on the right. So this makes a zero pair, leaving y by itself. 3/5 plus 2/5 is 5/5. 5/5 is not in simplest form, but 5/5 simplified is 1. So y equals 1. Okay. On number 18, excuse me, I wanted to show you something that we can do here. What I notice is that we have a fraction over here, and this is just a whole number, but let's write it in fraction form. We're going to write that as 10 over 1g instead of 10g. Okay, now 10g is 10 times g, and we can divide both sides by 10, but I'm going to show you a quick little, let me show you what I'm talking about. We could divide this by 10, and then I would divide this by 10. I'm going to write it as a fraction because this one's in fraction form. 10 over 10 is 1g, which is g. Remember, we do not divide fractions. We change them to a multiplication problem. So we keep the first term, change the division sign to a multiplying, and then we flip the 10 over 1 to 1/10. Simplify where we can. 4 and 10 are both even. We can divide both by 2. So 4 simplifies to 2, 10 simplifies to 5. I can do it again now because I've got 2 over 6. 2 and 6 both can be divided by 2, so 2 becomes a 1, 6 becomes a 3. So now I've got 1/3 times 1/5. 1 times 1 is 1, 3 times 5 is 15, so it equals 1 over 15. You are more than welcome to do this, but I want to show you something that we're really going to work hard on in 7th grade math, getting this under our belts, and that is a little slightly quicker way to do this. 10g, I want you to think of it as 10 over 1. Now, we can, instead of dividing by 10, we're going to skip right to multiplying by the reciprocal. So instead of writing out the dividing by 10, we're going to change it to a multiply by the reciprocal. So looking at our variable, 10 over 1 is the coefficient. We're going to multiply it times the reciprocal of 10 over 1, and that would be 1/10. And if I multiply this by 1/10, I have to multiply this by 1/10. Now, cancel out, leaving g by itself. And then again, we can simplify. 4 and 10 becomes 2/5. 2 over 6 can simplify to 1/3. So you multiply that out. 1 times 1 is 1. 3 times 5 is 15. So what we did was we kind of skipped the step. Instead of dividing by 10, we changed it to a multiplying problem. All right, let's look at this one, 20. And I'm going to go ahead and do, instead of dividing by 2/3, we are going to multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. The 3's cancel out to 1's, the 2's cancel out to 1's. But if I multiply the left by 3/2, I have to multiply the right by 3/2. Okay? Simplify where we can. 3 and 6 simplify to 1/2. And then we've got multiply across, that's all we can do. Multiply across, we got 5. 2 times 2 is 4. So it is the same thing as 5/4. All right, W is 5/4, which if you were going to write it as, it is in simplest form, but if you were writing it as a mixed number, you would get 1 and 1/4. All right, let's look at 23. Now, instead of working with fractions, we've got decimals, but it works the exact same way. We need to get P by itself. It's got a plus 6.3 with it. The opposite of plus 6.3, minus 6.3. But if I subtract 6.3 on the left, I have to do the same thing on the right. That cancels out, leaving P. I have to borrow. So P equals 2.8. All right, let's look at 24. K minus 8.5 is 2.7. I want K by itself. That's my variable. I've got this minus 8.5 with it. The opposite of minus 8.5 is plus 8.5. But if I add 8.5 on the left, I have to add 8.5 on the right. These cancel out. They make a zero pair, leaving K by itself. And then 7 plus 5 is 12. Put a 2, carry the 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 8 is 11. And the decimal just goes straight down. So K is 11.2. All right, so those are, we've got a few more. Let's look at 26. 4y minus 6.2 equals 13. This is a two-step. All right, so these are a little bit trickier. I need to get 4y by itself. That's the first thing I do. I've got this minus 6.2 with it, so I have to add 6.2. But I have to add 6.2 here. Now, one thing I want to caution you about, 6.2 has a decimal. 13, the decimal is not written. In order to keep decimals lined up when we add or subtract, I'm going to add a decimal and a 0. And instead of leaving it 13, put 13.0. So I can line up my 6.2 very nicely under that. This cancels out, and that leaves 4y equals 0 plus 2 is 2. Decimal comes down. 13 plus 6 is 19. All right. Now, the last step, that was the first step. The second step is we've got to divide both sides by 4 because I don't want 4y, I want 1y. So to get 1y, I have to divide 4y by 4. That becomes 1y. And I'm just going to come over here and do 19.2 divided by 4. I'm going to bring my decimal up and then just ignore it. 4 does not go into 1, but it goes into 19 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. 19 minus 16 is 3. And then we bring down our next digit, which is 2. And then we start over. 4 goes into 32 8 times. 8 times 4 is 32. 32 minus 32 is 0. So y is 4.8. All right, this is a one-step equation. 2.4p equals 36. Well, there's no plus or minus anything, but it's 2.4 times p. So what's the opposite of multiplying by p? Dividing by p. Dividing by 2.4. So I got to do the same thing on both sides. All right, this does not help very much, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to write 36. I'm dividing it by 2.4. Okay, if you remember, up here, we can have a decimal under the house, okay? But we can't have one outside the house. So we need to move this one over and make this 24. And then I need to add a 0. So I can move the decimal from after the 36 to here. I'm going to put it up there and then ignore it. 24 does not go into 3. 24 does go into 36 one time. 1 times 24 is 24, and you subtract. 36 minus 24 is 12. Bring down your 0. 24 into 120. For time's sake, it is 5. 5 times 24 is 120. You subtract, there's 0 left. So in this case, P equals 15. All right, let's look at 30. D minus 2.5 equals 1 3/10. All right, so what we are going to do is try to get D by itself. There's a minus 2.5 hanging out, so we need to do the opposite of minus 2.5. Well, that is plus 2.5. And if I add 2.5 on the left, I have to add 2.5 on the right. This makes a 0 pair, and that leaves D by itself. All right, the thing about adding is we have to be in the same land. We have to have the same denominator. This is in the land of tenths. This is in the land of fifths. I can make this go to the land of tenths. So how do I make a 5 become a 10? Times 2. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. So it's going to be 4/10. So instead of 1 3/10 plus 2/5, I'm going to do 1 3/10 plus 4/10. Well, 3/10 plus 4/10 is 7/10. So 1 3/10 plus 4/10 is 1 7/10. That's in simplest form. All right, the last one, there's that 3/7k equals 6. Okay, we've got a fraction as our coefficient. And so this is 3/7 times k. But let's multiply by the reciprocal. And the reciprocal of 3/7 is 7/3. And I need to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to put a little 6/1, make it a fraction too. All right, by multiplying reciprocals, you cancel out the 7s, cancel out the 3s, and end up with 1k. So k is exactly the way we need it. Can we do any simplifying here? Well, yes, we can. 3 and 6 will simplify. So I can make that 1 and this a 2. And then 2 times 7 is 14 over 1 times 1 is 1. 14 over 1 is the same thing as 14. So k equals 14. All right, we have done several together. It's just going to take practice for you guys to get comfortable doing these. Remember, if you're struggling with one, give me a call during office hours. I will help you through any problems that you have, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great one. Bye.